To fulfill my grandmother's dying contract, I married Adrian, the most powerful man in the city, for 3 years. For these 3 years, I behaved dutifully, serving as the invisible Mrs. Hua. On the day of the divorce, he handed me a check for 30 million, saying this was my compensation and that I should never appear before him again. That evening, at a highly confidential underground auction, the finale item was a rare herb that could save his mother's life, with the bidding stalled at 900 million. A cool female voice came from the top-tier private box, 1 billion. It was me. Under Adrian's shocked gaze, I stepped onto the stage, and the auctioneer bowed deeply to me. Congratulations to our boss, Miss Aria, for successfully bidding on her own collection. Mrs. Aria, this is the check from the Sir. Assistant Kevin pushed a 30 million check toward me, his tone businesslike, but his eyes hiding a hint of contempt. I didn't take it, my gaze falling on the noble and indifferent man on the opposite sofa. Adrian, my ex-husband, was impatiently checking his watch at that moment. Aria, 3 years, 30 million, you've made a fortune. His voice was low and laced with ice. Take the money and disappear from my world completely. I finally moved, picking up the check and gently rubbing the numbers with my fingertips. 30 million to buy out my 3 years of marriage, to buy out my 3 years of dutiful behavior. Indeed, for an ordinary woman it was a great deal. I chuckled lightly, tore the check in half, and threw it on the pristine coffee table. Mr. Adrian, these 3 years have been hard on you. Adrian's brows furrowed instantly, his handsome face showing obvious anger. He probably thought I would humbly beg to stay or hysterically cling, as in the past countless times. But I simply stood up, smoothed my skirt, and calmly said, I've signed the divorce agreement. Take your time leaving, I won't see you out. With that, I turned and walked away without glancing back. Behind me was Adrian's suppressed, angry breathing. I walked out of the Civil Affairs Bureau's door, the sunlight blinding, as if from another world. 3 years ago, carrying my grandmother's last wish and a contract, I moved into the Hua family and became Adrian's wife. For these 3 years, I played the role of a perfect invisible person. He had his white moonlight, and I guarded my contract. We stayed out of each other's way. He thought I was a clinging vine attached to him, but he didn't know I was just waiting for the contract to expire. My phone vibrated. It was a message from my assistant Charles. Boss, the evening primrose is ready, it's the finale tonight. I replied with one word, good. Tonight was when the real show would begin. As night fell, the TQ Underground Auction House. This was a den of extravagance where the elite threw away fortunes, with strict security and absolute membership invitation only. I sat in the top-tier V01 private box, overlooking the bustling crowd below through the one-way glass. Adrian was there too. He sat in the opposite V02 box, his expression grave, beside a woman in a white gown with a gentle temperament, Vivian, his white moonlight. I swirled the red wine in my glass, a cold smile curling at my lips. The auction proceeded methodically, the earlier items mere appetizers. Finally, the host announced in a nearly reverent tone, next is tonight's finale item, the century-old evening primrose. Its effects are well known to the distinguished guests here. It has miraculous efficacy for neural exhaustion and is a true life-saving herb. Starting bid, 500 million. As the words fell, the room went silent for a moment, then erupted in suppressed exclamations. Adrian's mother, Grace, suffered from this rare neural exhaustion, bedridden for 2 years, sustained only by expensive medications. This herb was something he was determined to obtain. 600 million. Adrian's voice came from the opposite box, decisive and firm. Immediately, someone followed, 650 million. 700 million. The price soared rapidly, soon reaching 900 million. The bidder was a Middle Eastern tycoon, clearly also for life-saving purposes. Adrian's face had darkened to the point of dripping water. 900 million was nearly his financial limit. Vivian beside him held his hand, softly comforting him, but he just stared fixedly at the stage. The auctioneer called 3 times, the gavel about to fall. 900 million once, 900 million twice. At this critical moment, I pressed the intercom. A cool female voice transmitted clearly through the microphone across the venue, 1 billion. The room erupted in uproar. All eyes turned to my V01 box, including Adrian's opposite. He stood abruptly, his eyes full of utter disbelief. This voice was all too familiar to him. It was Aria. The ex-wife he had dismissed with 30 million, the one he summoned and dismissed at will, who had behaved dutifully for 3 years. How could she be here? Where did she get 1 billion? Ignoring his shocked gaze, I pushed open the box door and slowly walked out accompanied by Assistant Charles. The spotlight hit me. I was wearing a tailored black velvet gown, hair pinned up, revealing a slender swan neck, a stark contrast to the woman in the Hua family who always wore cotton home clothes and went barefaced. I descended the spiral staircase step by step, my high heels clicking crisply on the spotless floor, each sound like stepping on Adrian's heart. He stared fixedly at me, his eyes filled with shock, doubt, and a hint of tricked anger. I walked straight to the auction stage, and the auctioneer immediately bowed 90 degrees to me with utmost respect. Congratulations to our boss, Miss Aria, for successfully bidding on her own collection. Boss? Her own collection? These 2 words exploded like heavy bombs in the crowd. Adrian's body swayed, his face turning ashen instantly. Vivian beside him was also stunned, her well-maintained face full of jealousy and reluctance. I took the brocade box containing the evening primrose from the auctioneer and spoke into the microphone, my voice not loud but clear enough for everyone to hear. Thank you all for honoring us tonight. This evening primrose is my private property. I brought it out tonight just to see its value. I paused, my gaze subtly sweeping over Adrian. Now it seems it's priceless. With that, I turned to leave. Stop. Adrian's voice was hoarse, with a tremor. Aria, what exactly do you want? I stopped, turned back to him with a distant smile on my face. Mr. Adrian, we're divorced. My affairs are none of your concern. You knew I needed this herb. He rushed below the stage, glaring at me with red eyes from a few steps away. Are you getting revenge on me? Revenge? I laughed as if hearing the biggest joke. Mr. Adrian, you think too highly of yourself. To me, you're just an insignificant ex-husband. Then why not sell it to me? He almost roared. I held up the brocade box leisurely, my things, I decide who to sell to or not, based on my mood. And you, Adrian, happened to put me in a very bad mood. With that, I ignored him and left under the escort of bodyguards. Behind me were Adrian's furious roars and Vivian's affected consolations. Back in the car, Charles handed me a cup of warm water. Boss, Mr. Adrian is following. I looked at the relentlessly pursuing Maybach in the rearview mirror, my expression unchanging. Lose him? Yes. The car made a beautiful drift, entering complex urban alleys, soon leaving Adrian's car far behind. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes. Adrian, this is just the beginning. What you owe me, what you owe the Inn family, I'll make you repay bit by bit, doubled. Early the next morning, my phone was bombarded with calls from Adrian. I blocked him directly, and the world became peaceful. Soon after, Charles called. Boss, Mr. Adrian is using all his connections to investigate your background and TQs as well. I picked up my coffee and took a sip, let him investigate. What he finds will be what I want him to find. Additionally, Charles paused, he's contacted Miss Vivian, seemingly to have her act as a mediator. I set down the coffee cup, a flash of sarcasm in my eyes. Vivian, the woman Adrian cherished for 3 years but couldn't marry due to opposition from the Hua family patriarch. She was also the mastermind who designed my grandmother's fall down the stairs, indirectly causing her death. Adrian didn't know that the treasure he held in his palm was a venomous beauty snake. In the afternoon, while processing files in my office, the front desk called saying Miss Vivian was looking for me. Let her up. A few minutes later, Vivian walked in gracefully on high heels. Today she wore the latest Chanel suit, with exquisite makeup, looking like a pampered princess. Miss Aria, she sat opposite me, her posture very low. I know there's some misunderstanding between you and Adrian. But Aunt Grace's illness can't be delayed anymore. I beg you, sell us the evening primrose, okay? Name your price. As she spoke, her eyes reddened, looking like a compassionate bodhisattva. If I didn't know her true face, I might have been deceived too. I leaned back in my chair, watching her performance leisurely. Miss Vivian, in what capacity are you begging me? I asked. Adrian's girlfriend? Or his future wife? Vivian's face stiffened momentarily, then returned to a pitiful expression. Adrian and I are just friends. I just can't bear to see Aunt Grace suffer. Oh? Is that so? I smiled. But how did I hear that Mr. Howard has always opposed you entering the family because he thinks you're scheming? Vivian's face turned completely pale. This was the Hua family's secret, known to few outsiders. She forced composure. Miss Aria, don't believe those rumors. We're talking about Aunt Grace's life now. You know we're talking about a life? I retracted my smile, my gaze turning icy instantly. 3 years ago, when my grandmother was in the hospital, why didn't you think that was a life too? Vivian's pupils contracted sharply, and she stood up in panic. What nonsense are you talking? I don't understand. It doesn't matter if you don't understand. I stood up, walked to her, looking down at her. I'll make you remember slowly. I leaned to her ear, whispering so only we could hear. You think what you did back then was seamless? That fishing line you used to trip my grandmother, I still have it well preserved. Vivian's body trembled violently, cold sweat instantly soaking her back. You. Get out. I straightened up, coldly uttering one word. Vivian, as if drained of all strength, scrambled out of my office. I knew she would go to Adrian. Sure enough, within half an hour, Adrian called my assistant's phone, his tone unprecedentedly furious. Aria. If you dare touch Vivian, just try. I took the phone, my voice calm and steady. Adrian, control your woman. Next time she appears before me, it won't be just a scare. You vicious woman. Vivian is so kind, how can you slander her? Kind? I sneered. The kindness in your eyes is just superb acting to me. Adrian, you've been deceived by her for 3 years, do you plan to be fooled for a lifetime? Shut up. I won't allow you to say that about her. Adrian's voice was full of defense. Aria, I warn you, hand over the medicine, or don't blame me for not considering old feelings. Old feelings? I scoffed. Have there ever been feelings between us? The other end was deadly silent. I hung up directly. Adrian, your weakness is Vivian. So I'll first tear apart her perfect mask and let you see with your own eyes what you've fallen in love with. Adrian's retaliation came quickly. One of my subsidiaries suddenly faced a joint supply cutoff from several suppliers, and the bank froze our loan application citing risk assessment. A series of combo punches, fast and ruthless, Adrian's typical style. When Charles called, his tone was anxious. Boss, these suppliers all have the shadow of the Hua Group behind them, our new project's funding chain. What's the panic? I interrupted him. If he wants to play, I'll accompany him to the end. I had him send me the information on those cut-off suppliers. Half an hour later, I appeared in the office of the largest supplier, Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee was a pot-bellied middle-aged man. Seeing me, he wore a fake smile. Oh, isn't this Miss Aria? What wind blew you here? Mr. Lee, let's be straightforward. I threw a document on his desk. How much benefit did Adrian give you to make you willing to pay triple the breach penalty to terminate with me? Mr. Lee's face changed. He picked up the document, glanced at it, and sweat beaded on his forehead. It contained all evidence of his tax evasion and money laundering in overseas accounts over the years. Miss Aria, what do you mean by this? His voice was weak. Nothing much. I sat opposite him, legs crossed. I give you 2 choices. 1. Immediately resume supply and reduce the price by 10% as compensation for wasting my time today. 2. I send this to the tax bureau. Mr. Lee's sweat poured like rain. With trembling hands, he wiped repeatedly with tissues from the desk. He didn't expect this young, beautiful woman to have such ruthless methods. I choose one. He said it almost crying. Smart man. I stood up. I hope to see your trucks at my company building within half an hour. Also, tell the other companies my patience is limited. Walking out of Mr. Lee's company, the sunlight was perfect. Adrian thought choking my supply chain would make me submit. He was too naive. He didn't know that during these 3 years as his invisible wife, I had also thoroughly mapped out all the veins of his business empire, including his shady partners. Sure enough, within an hour, all the cut-off suppliers were begging to resume cooperation, and the bank's loans were approved smoothly. Adrian's plans fell through. That evening, I met a few friends for dinner at a private club. As I entered the private room, I saw an unexpected person, Adrian. He sat in the main seat, his face gloomy, the surrounding rich second generations who usually called me brother now silent as cicadas in winter. Seeing me enter, Adrian raised his eyes, gaze like knives. Aria, your methods truly make me see you in a new light. I ignored him, walked straight to the empty seat beside him, sat down, and poured myself a glass of wine. What brings the great Adrian here? Give me the medicine. He got straight to the point, tone brooking no argument. On what grounds? I swirled my glass, my smile not reaching my eyes. Because I'm Adrian. He stared fixedly at me. In this city, there's nothing I, Adrian, can't get. Is that so? I set down the glass, leaned forward, staring into his eyes. Then let's wait and see. The atmosphere tensed instantly, others in the room dared not breathe. At that moment, the door opened, and Vivian entered carrying a bottle of red wine. Seeing me, she paused, then showed a perfect smile. Miss Aria is here too. Adrian, I brought your favorite Romani Conti. She naturally walked to Adrian's side, trying to pour for him. But Adrian pushed her hand away. Get out. He said coldly. Vivian's smile froze on her face, tears welling up instantly. Adrian, what's wrong? I told you to get out. Adrian emphasized, eyes full of irritation. He probably felt Vivian's appearance made him lose face during our confrontation. Vivian bit her lip aggrievedly, glanced at me with teary eyes as if saying it was all this vixen's fault. Then, she covered her face and ran out. What a show. I raised my glass to Adrian. Adrian, it seems your white moonlight isn't very obedient. Adrian's face looked even worse. He suddenly grabbed my wrist, his grip so strong it nearly crushed my bones. Aria, must you oppose me? It's you who's opposing me. I met his gaze fearlessly. You tore up the contract first, and you struck first. Contract? He sneered. You dare mention the contract? That ridiculous contract was just waste paper my grandfather made to appease your grandmother. Did you really think you could cling to the Hua family for life with that? My heart sank sharply. So in his mind, the contract bearing the friendship between our families and my grandmother's dying entrustment was just waste paper. A chill rose from my heart, spreading rapidly to my limbs. I forcefully pulled my hand away, my voice cold as ice. Adrian, you'll regret this. Adrian laughed as if hearing the biggest joke, stood up, looking down at me with eyes full of mockery. Regret? Aria, the most correct thing I've done in my life is divorcing you. This is my final warning. Before noon tomorrow, deliver the medicine to my mother's ward. Otherwise, I'll show you what true regret is. He dropped the threat and turned to leave. The room was deadly silent. I sat there, watching the swirling red liquid in the glass, my heart ice cold. The next day, I didn't deliver the medicine. Just after noon, Charles called, his voice unprecedentedly panicked. Boss, bad news. Our evening primrose cultivation base was burned down. I stood abruptly, the phone slipping from my hand and crashing to the ground. It was over. That wasn't an ordinary base. For safety, I had kept the true century-old evening primrose mother plant in the core constant temperature room for cultivation and propagation. The one at the auction was just the first generation offspring I cultivated. Now, the mother plant was gone. Adrian's mother was truly beyond saving. And I had lost my most important bargaining chip. When I arrived at the base, the site was cordoned off, the air filled with a pungent burnt smell. The entire cultivation base was reduced to scorched earth. Firefighters were finishing up, Charles standing aside, face ashen. Found out who did it? My voice was hoarse. Surveillance all destroyed, they were professionals. Charles shook his head. But the timing is too coincidental. Of course I knew who. Adrian. He thought burning my base would force me to hand over the auction herb. He didn't know he had burned his mother's only hope. At that moment, my phone rang, a stranger's number. I answered, and Vivian's tearful voice came, Aria. Come to the central hospital quickly. Aunt Grace. Aunt Grace is dying. My brain buzzed, going blank. How could it be so fast? Even without the evening primrose, with medications, Grace could last at least half a year. Without time to think, I drove to the hospital immediately. Outside the ward, the Hua family crowded. Adrian stood at the front, back rigid, exuding a cold aura that kept strangers away. Seeing me, he turned sharply, eyes bloodshot like an enraged beast. He approached step by step, each with overwhelming anger. Aria, are you satisfied? He grabbed my throat, pinning me hard against the wall. Suffocation hit instantly. I struggled but couldn't pry open his iron-like grip. If anything happens to my mom, he whispered in my ear, voice like from hell, I'll make you and your entire family bury with her. His eyes held undisguised killing intent. Looking at his mad appearance, a huge sense of absurdity surged in my heart. He didn't know that the one who truly pushed his mother to the brink was himself. Just as I thought I was about to die, the ward door opened suddenly. A doctor rushed out, face full of uncertain surprise. Mr. Adrian. A miracle. It's a medical miracle. Adrian paused. The patient's vital signs have suddenly all returned to normal. Adrian's hand loosened. I slumped to the ground, gasping for fresh air, my throat burning. Everyone was stunned, then erupted in huge joy. Adrian was the first to rush into the ward. I supported myself on the wall, slowly stood, and followed inside. In the ICU, Grace, originally on the brink of death, now lay peacefully on the bed, the ECG curve steady and strong. Doctors surrounded the instruments, marveling, completely unable to explain the phenomenon. Adrian stood by the bed, looking at his mother, trembling with excitement. Vivian squeezed over, holding Grace's hand, crying with joy, Auntie, you're finally better, that's great. Amid the jubilation, only I stood quietly in the corner, watching the ECG, brows furrowed. Something was wrong. Too wrong. Neural exhaustion is irreversible, no drug can cure a patient overnight. Unless. A terrifying thought flashed in my mind. I quickly walked to a young nurse and whispered, Did the patient use any special medicine last night? The nurse thought and shook her head, No, just routine maintenance drugs. Oh right, last night Miss Vivian visited and fed Madam half a bowl of soup she personally brewed. Vivian. Her again. My heart sank. I walked to Adrian, grabbed his arm, Adrian, it's not that simple, let's talk. He shook off my hand disgustedly, Aria, my mom is better, your medicine is useless to me now. I advise you to disappear immediately, I don't want to see your disgusting face again. The disgust in his eyes stabbed my heart like a knife. Adrian, listen to me, I grabbed him, forcing him to look at me. Your mother isn't cured, this is an illusion. Someone gave her a drastic drug, overdrawing her last vitality to create a false recovery. Within 3 days, she will. Slap. A loud slap hit my face hard. It was Vivian. Her eyes red, body shaking, she pointed at me and cursed, Aria. You vicious woman. You wouldn't give the antidote yourself, and now that auntie is better, you curse her here. What is your heart made of? Adrian looked at me like I was crazy. Aria, I think you're truly mad. I covered my burning face, looking at these two blinded people, feeling a wave of helplessness. Believe it or not. I dropped the words and turned to leave. I couldn't wait anymore. I had to find evidence within 3 days to expose Vivian's conspiracy. Otherwise, Grace was truly doomed. Back in the car, I immediately called Charles. Charles, help me investigate a drug called marrow-burning incense. Also, find a way to get a sample of the soup Vivian sent to the hospital last night. Marrow-burning incense? Charles's voice was surprised. Boss, isn't that a banned drug? It's said to instantly stimulate human life potential, but after the effect, the person will immediately burn out. Correct. My voice was cold. I suspect someone gave it to Madame Grace. Hanging up, I drove to a place, the Hua family's old residence. Adrian's grandfather, Mr. Howard, a truly wise elder. Back then, he had overcome opposition to arrange my marriage with Adrian. It was also him who, after my grandmother's death, said to me, Aria girl, don't be afraid, Grandpa Howard is here. These 3 years, he had been recuperating abroad, knowing little about family matters. Now, he was the only one who could help me. When I arrived at the old residence, the butler was surprised but respectfully invited me in. Mr. Howard was sitting in the courtyard sunbathing. Seeing me, his cloudy eyes brightened. Aria girl, you're back. I knelt before him, tears uncontrollable, bursting out. Grandpa Howard, I've divorced Adrian. The elder sighed, extended his withered hand, and patted my head. I know. You've been wronged, child. I told him everything, including the evening primrose, Vivian's conspiracy, and my guess about Grace's condition. After listening, the elder was silent for a long time, a sharp glint in his weathered eyes. This Vivian, I saw long ago she wasn't good. I didn't expect her to dare do such a thing. He struck his cane forcefully. Aria girl, rest assured. Grandpa will handle this for you. He picked up the phone and dialed. Go investigate for me. Dig up every detail on that woman Vivian from childhood to now. Also, send people to the hospital to watch Grace's ward 24/7, no one approaches. With Mr. Howard's support, my heart settled. That evening, Charles got the soup test report. Indeed, it contained components of marrow-burning incense. At the same time, news came from Mr. Howard. Vivian's background was more complex than I imagined. She wasn't an ordinary innocent girl. Her father was the head of a vast overseas black market chain, specializing in shady businesses. Vivian approaching Adrian was a calculated conspiracy from the start. She eyed the Hua group's fat piece. The evening primrose matter was also orchestrated by her. She knew early that Adrian needed this herb, so she bribed one of my subordinates to learn about the auction. Then, she incited Adrian to seize it forcefully while secretly sending people to burn my base, aiming to cut off Grace's lifeline completely. Finally, using marrow-burning incense to create a false cure, gaining trust from Adrian and the Hua family. Once Grace died, with Adrian grief-stricken, she could rightfully take control as the lady of the house. What a killing 3 birds with 1 stone, such vicious scheming. Looking at the documents, my hands and feet went cold. Aria girl, Mr. Howard's voice was heavy, this is the Hua family wronging you. Adrian failed to see people clearly, he was blind. Grandpa Howard, saying this now is useless. I took a deep breath. We must find a way to expose her before Vivian's conspiracy succeeds. How do you want to do it? Turn her plan against her. A cold light flashed in my eyes. Doesn't she want to be Adrian's wife? We'll give her that chance. The next day, the Hua family released news. Madame Grace recovered from serious illness. The family would hold a grand banquet for good luck. At the same time, Adrian announced high profile that he would propose to Vivian at the banquet. The news shocked the city. Everyone said Vivian had waited till the clouds parted, finally marrying into the top family. Vivian was even more triumphant, almost as the future lady of the Hua family, accepting media interviews, talking about her unwavering love with Adrian. Meanwhile, I became the city's laughingstock, a vicious woman abandoned by a wealthy family, delusionally using life-saving medicine to blackmail her ex-husband. On the banquet day, I received no invitation. But I went anyway. Wearing a fiery red gown, alone, I appeared at the door of the Hua's opulent banquet hall. The security at the door stopped me. "Miss, please show your invitation." I smiled, removed my sunglasses. "I'm Aria." The security's face changed, clearly recognizing me as the recent news figure. "Sorry, Miss Aria, no invitation, you can't enter." As we stalemated, Mr. Howard's butler hurried out. "Let Miss Aria in." Security immediately made way. I entered the hall, instantly drawing all eyes. Whispers, disdainful looks, schadenfreude smiles came from all sides. Ignoring them, I walked straight to the banquet's protagonists. Adrian and Vivian stood together, accepting blessings. A talented man and beautiful woman, they looked well matched. Seeing me, Adrian's brows furrowed immediately. Vivian held his arm, showing a victor's smile, eyes full of provocation. "Miss Aria, what are you doing here? You're not welcome," she said softly, but her tone was hostile. I ignored her, just looking at Adrian. "Adrian, I came to show you something." I opened my handbag and took out something, not documents or evidence, but an old yellowed photo. On it, two young girls with blooming smiles leaned intimately. One was my grandmother. The other. Adrian's pupils contracted sharply. "This is my grandmother?" The two girls in the photo, one my grandmother Margaret, the other Adrian's grandmother Sophia. It was their young days photo, with elegant handwriting on the back, "May our friendship last forever." Adrian stared fixedly at the photo, face drained of color. Of course he recognized his grandmother's young appearance. What's going on?" His voice trembled. "What's going on?" I sneered, gaze sweeping everyone present, voice not loud but clearly spreading through the hall. "Didn't you always think I was clinging to you, trying to attach to the Hua family? Didn't you think our family's marriage contract was your grandfather's charity to me?" I held up the photo. "Now I tell you, Adrian, you're wrong. Terribly wrong. Back then, your grandmother Sophia was gravely ill during escape, my grandmother Margaret, a doctor, cared for her tirelessly for 3 months, pulling her from death's door. They became sworn sisters and promised that if they had descendants, they would marry to continue this bond. Later, the Hua family rose to prominence as the top family. Our family fell on hard times. But my grandmother never thought to use this favor to cling. Until 3 years ago, gravely ill, with my parents dead and me orphaned, she couldn't rest easy, so she had Grandpa Howard fulfill the old promise, making you marry me." My voice choked. "What she wanted wasn't the Hua family's wealth, just for you to protect me for 3 years when I was most helpless. Once I could stand on my own, the contract would dissolve automatically. The contract stated clearly, 3 years. I married you not to cling, but to fulfill my grandmother's dying wish." The room was deadly silent. Everyone was shocked by this stunning reversal. Adrian was as if struck by lightning, standing dazed, lips trembling, unable to speak. What he thought was a burden and shame was actually a heavy favor and protection. What had he done these 3 years? He treated Aria as heir, cold violence, making her the city's joke. He even insulted her with 30 million at divorce. He not only betrayed a woman who loved him but trampled the most precious bond between ancestors. "No, impossible." Vivian screamed, face pale. "You're lying. You bitch, you made it all up." Whether I made it up, I looked at her coldly, Grandpa Howard knows best. All eyes turned to Mr. Howard slowly emerging from the inner hall. Leaning on his cane, face heavy, what Aria girl said is every word true. He looked at his distraught grandson, eyes full of disappointment. "Adrian, you've disappointed me too much." "Grandpa." Adrian tried to say something but found his throat blocked. Huge regret and pain flooded him like tides. He finally understood why Aria looked at him that way at the auction. It wasn't revenge, but disappointment. He finally understood why Aria said he would regret. Yes, he regretted to the core. At that moment, the hall door opened again. Several uniformed police entered, heading straight to Vivian. "Miss Vivian, you're suspected of intentional injury and using banned drugs, please come with us." Vivian collapsed completely. "No. It wasn't me. It's her. Aria framed me. She pointed at me madly." I just looked at her coldly. On the big screen, a video suddenly played, hospital corridor surveillance. In it, Vivian sneaked into Grace's ward and poured a packet of powder into the soup. Ironclad evidence. Vivian screamed in despair as police dragged her out. A grand proposal banquet turned into a complete farce. After Vivian was taken, the banquet ended unhappily. Adrian stood like a soulless statue. I walked to him, threw the 30 million check fragments at his feet. "Adrian, now we're even." With that, I turned to leave. "Don't go." He suddenly hugged me from behind, very tightly, as if to meld me into his bones. "Aria, I'm sorry. I'm sorry." His voice was full of pain and despair, warm liquid dripping on my neck. He cried. The always superior, arrogant Adrian cried. My heart stung for a moment. But only a moment. I forcefully pried his fingers one by one. "Adrian, it's too late." I broke free from his embrace and left the house without looking back. In the car, Charles handed me a brocade box. "Boss, this is..." I opened it. Inside lay a plant with full roots, emitting a faint moon-white glow, the true century-old evening primrose mother plant. That day's fire at the base was set by me. I had anticipated Adrian's character. After my refusal, he would use extreme means for revenge. So I preemptively turned the tables, staging this play. It was to reveal all truths at Adrian's most desperate moment, giving him the fatal blow. As for Grace's illness, "To the hospital," I said. Grace's false recovery had ended, she was now in deep coma, vital signs weak, could pass any time. Doctors had issued a critical notice. Adrian knelt by the bed, eyes vacant, as if aged 10 years overnight. Mr. Howard sat beside, sighing nonstop. When I pushed the door in, all looked at me. Adrian raised his head, seeing the box in my hand, a spark of hope ignited in his eyes. He crawled over, grabbed my pant leg, hoarsely begging, "Aria, I beg you, save my mom. I'll give you anything, my life, the entire Hua group, all to you." Looking at his humbled-to-dust appearance, my heart had no ripple. I bypassed him, went to the bed, handed the evening primrose to the doctor beside. "Use this, perhaps there's still a chance." The doctor took it like treasure and prepared immediately. Adrian wanted to say something but was struck back by Mr. Howard's cane. "Shut up. You have no right to speak to Aria girl." I didn't glance at them again and left the ward. I saved Grace not for Adrian. First, for Grandpa Howard, the only one in the Hua family who gave me warmth these 3 years. Second, for my grandmother, if her spirit knew, she wouldn't want her old friend's descendant to die over these grudges. As for Adrian, from the moment he chose to believe Vivian and burn my base, between us, only hatred remained. Grace was saved. The evening primrose's effect exceeded imagination, not only pulling her from danger but restoring her body at a visible speed. The Hua family was grateful to tears. Adrian guarded my company building daily, rain or shine. He sent flowers, jewelry, luxury cars, properties, everything he thought would please a woman, flowing like water to me. I refused all. He started the clumsiest way, personally making lunch for me, then waiting like a door god from noon to midnight, just to see me once. Company employees were stunned, who would think the once commanding Hua president would become a devoted waiting stone. But I never saw him once. Charles felt pity. "Boss, Mr. Adrian, looks quite pitiful." Pitiful? I was reading a file, not lifting my head. When he neglected me for 3 years, and the city mocked me, who pitied me? When he trampled my grandmother's favor as waste paper, did he pity her? What he's doing now is just compensating his guilt, self-touching. Once he feels his guilt cleared, he'll leave contentedly. I won't give him that chance. I won't soften again. A month later, Grace recovered and was discharged. Her first act was to come to my company personally. She held my hand, tears streaming. Good child, it's our family that wronged you. Adrian is a bastard, ignore him. From now on, you're my own daughter, the family is forever your home. I supported her, feeling touched. Grace was proud but not bad-hearted. These 3 years, though cold to me, she never gave me disdain like others. Aunt Grace, it's all past. I said. It won't pass. She said agitatedly. I came today to ask you one thing. Are you willing to give Adrian another chance? I was silent. Grace sighed, I know he hurt you deeply. But child, he truly regrets. This month, he lost 20 pounds, not eating or drinking, just guarding you. If this continues, he'll collapse. That's his own matter. My voice was calm. Aria, Grace gripped my hand. Count it as me begging you, okay? Just see him once, make it clear. Whatever the result, let him give up. Looking at her expectant eyes, I softened after all. Okay. I agreed to see Adrian once in the cafe downstairs. When he came, I almost didn't recognize him. Wearing a wrinkled shirt, stubbly beard, sunken eyes, exuding decadence, where was the half of the former spirited CEO? Seeing me, his eyes burst with huge light. Aria. He tried to pull my hand, but I dodged. Sit. I pointed opposite. He sat awkwardly, hands on knees, like a child who did wrong. Aria, I know saying sorry more is useless. He looked at me, voice hoarse. I'm a bastard, blind, inhuman. The biggest mistake of my life was not cherishing you. I came today not to beg forgiveness. I just want to tell you, I'm willing to wait. No matter how long, a year, 10 years, a lifetime, I'll wait until you're willing to look at me again. I listened quietly, then took a document from my bag and pushed it to him. What is this? He was puzzled. And group, 10% shares transfer agreement. I said. He was stunned. I spoke faintly, I've checked, when my grandmother saved yours, it not only took 3 months but nearly exhausted all in family's savings and precious herbs. Converted to current market value, 10% of what group shares isn't much, right? Adrian's face turned ashen instantly. He understood my meaning. I wasn't here to hear his repentance. I was here to settle accounts. Aria, you. He trembled. Must you do this? Between us, must we calculate so clearly? Otherwise? I countered. Mr. Adrian, we're divorced. No affection left, naturally only calculations remain. I don't want shares. He suddenly agitated. I want only you. Aria, only you. Too late. I stood, looking down at him, just like at the auction. Adrian, sign it. This is what the family owes the family. From now on, grudges cleared, no involvement. With that, I turned and left, giving him no chance to speak. Behind came his suppressed, painful sobs. Adrian finally signed. 10% of what group shares transferred to me overnight. I became the largest shareholder outside the family. But I never attended a shareholders' meeting. To me, this was just reclaiming what belonged to the family. Adrian and I truly had no ties, as I said. He didn't seek me again. I heard he handed the group fully to professional managers, backpacked to remote mountains, and became a volunteer teacher. For 5 years. These 5 years, my career grew bigger. TQ became a global top private club, and group under my lead revived its past glory. I became the legendary business queen in others' mouths. Excellent suitors abounded, but I never moved. I thought Adrian and my story should have turned the page long ago. Until that day, invited to a remote mountain for a charity school's completion ceremony. At the ceremony, I saw a familiar yet strange figure. He wore washed-out old clothes, skin tanned dark, face with a gentle smile, distributing candies to children. It was Adrian. Thinner, darker, but eyes unprecedentedly clear and calm. Children liked him, surrounding him, chattering, "Teacher Adrian." Seeing me, he paused, then gave a shallow smile. No past regret or pain, just a faint smile of old friends reuniting. After the ceremony, we walked side by side on the rural path. "How did you come here?" I asked. "Atonement." He looked at the distant sunset, softly saying, "I used to think money solved all problems. Later I found I was wrong. What I owe you, the family, can't be repaid with money." These 5 years teaching here, watching these children, I slowly understood what true giving is, what true protection is. He turned, looking at me, gaze frank and sincere. "Aria, thank you. Thank you for resolutely pushing me away back then, giving me the chance to rediscover myself." Looking at him, my heart mixed feelings. The man before me was no longer the arrogant Adrian of yore. Years and hardships had smoothed his edges, settled his soul. "What are your plans next?" I asked. "The school still needs teachers. I think I'll stay here forever." He smiled. "It's good here, very peaceful." The sunset's afterglow sprinkled on him, gilding him gold. I suddenly felt perhaps this was his best destination. We didn't mention the past again. Some wounds heal, but scars remain forever. Before leaving, he escorted me to the village entrance. "Aria," he suddenly called. I turned. He took something from his pocket and handed it, a small ring woven from grass leaves. Rough craftsmanship, but heartfelt. "For you." He scratched his head embarrassedly. "Nothing good here. This, consider it, a wedding gift delayed by 8 years." Looking at the grass ring, my eyes suddenly heated. I didn't take it. Just smiled at him. "Teacher Adrian, goodbye." The car started slowly. From the rear view, I saw him standing, waving until becoming a tiny black dot. I withdrew my gaze, looking afar. On the horizon, the sunset brilliant as fire. Aria's brand new life was just beginning. As for Adrian, let him and his delayed deep affection stay in the past.